The Galaxy Council chamber was filled with lights and voices as leaders from many worlds gathered to decide the future of the stars, and the humans sat among them, their faces calm, but their eyes sharp and watchful, and though they had been invited, as equals they could feel the weight of judgment pressing on them from every side, for the other races still thought of Earth as wild and dangerous, and they wanted to remind the humans of their place. Daniel sat at the long table with Claire and other members of the human delegation, and he listened as alien voices rose around them, demanding that Earth hand over resources and swear loyalty to the Council, or face consequences. And he kept his hands steady, but his mind burned, for he could see that no matter what words were spoken, the decision had already been made. The Council wanted obedience, not friendship, and the moment of truth was coming. Claire leaned closer to him, her voice low as she whispered that they are not giving us a choice, and Daniel nodded, his jaw tight, for he had seen this pattern before in history on Earth, when the strong demanded the weak kneel, and he thought of all the struggles that humanity had faced, storms, wars, plagues, hunger, and how every time they had risen again stronger than before, and he knew deep inside that they would not kneel today. The council leader, a tall alien with pale skin and cold eyes, stood and raised his voice, declaring that humanity must decide now, surrender resources, and obey or face the wrath of the United Galaxy. And the hall went silent as every gaze turned to the humans, waiting to see them fold under the weight of fear. But Daniel slowly rose from his chair and his eyes swept across the chamber, and he felt the silence deepen until every breath could be heard. He said in a voice steady and clear that humanity will not kneel. Humanity will not surrender. We have built our world with our own hands, and we will defend it with our lives if needed. And his words echoed through the chamber like thunder, and the silence that followed was so sharp it seemed to cut the air itself, and for a moment no one moved, as if time had stopped. Then the council erupted in outrage, with voices shouting threats and promises of destruction and ships and armies, but the humans did not flinch, and instead Daniel turned to his people and said quietly, "It is time." And one by one they stood, and together they walked out of the chamber, their steps steady and unbroken, while the galaxy watched in disbelief, for no one had ever dared to defy the council in such a way. Claire felt her heart race as they stepped outside into the open halls, and she glanced back only once to see the alien leaders shouting and pounding their fists, yet their eyes were filled with something else, something they had not shown before. It was fear. And she knew then that the choice they had made would change everything, not just for Earth, but for every world across the stars. As they left the great hall, the whispers began to spread like fire across the galaxy that the humans had stormed out of the council and refused to kneel. And on distant worlds, people spoke the story with awe and fear, some saying that Earth had doomed itself, and others saying that Earth had finally done what no one else dared to do. And in that moment, the future of the galaxy began to tremble under the weight of a single choice. Laura stood in the great hall of the council chamber, her heart beating fast, but her face calm as stone. The words of the alien chancellor still echoed in her mind, and the eyes of countless alien delegates burned with curiosity, anger, and disbelief. She had spoken simple words, words that no race had ever dared to say to the council before, and those words still floated in the air like smoke. Humanity is not your servant. Daniel stood beside her, tall, strong, silent, his jaw set, and his eyes forward. He did not need to speak, because the silence he carried spoke louder than anything, and when he turned and walked away, every footstep sounded like thunder rolling across the chamber. Laura followed him, and the rest of the human delegation moved behind them, not in fear, not in shame, but with steady steps that made the ground tremble in the minds of those who watched. The great doors opened, and the humans stormed out, leaving a chamber full of whispers, gasps, and the stunned stares of creatures who had ruled the galaxy for centuries. The council chamber had never felt so cold or so heavy, and for the first time the rulers of 1,000 worlds felt something strange creeping into their bones. Fear. The silence that followed their exit was sharp. Some aliens shouted in anger, demanding punishment. Others murmured in secret tones, wondering if this was the beginning of something far greater. The presiding chancellor struck the staff against the floor, demanding order, but the chamber refused to calm down. Outside the chamber, Laura walked quickly beside Daniel, her hands clenched, her voice low. "Daniel, they will come for us. They cannot allow this insult. Daniel did not slow his steps. His eyes looked straight ahead, his voice low steady. Let them come. He said they have no idea what they are dealing with on the council floor. An elder creature with skin like pale stone leaned close to another delegate and whispered, "Do you see it?" They did not even raise their voices yet. The chamber shook. Another hissed back. No one ever walks out, no one, and they will pay for it, but deep inside their eyes carried not only anger but unease because the humans did not shout or threaten. They simply walked out. And that was more terrifying than war itself. News traveled faster than light across the networks of 1,000 worlds. The story spread and every telling made it more dramatic. In one version, the humans threw down the council banners. In another, they stared down the council guards until they backed away. In truth, all they had done was walk away. Yet it was enough to send shockwaves through the stars in mining colonies. Workers gathered around old screens, listening in silence. Merchants in distant markets paused in their trade, whispering, "What does it mean? What will happen now?" In dark bars, soldiers of other species drank nervously, remembering old stories about humans and the world that raised them. A world that had oceans, storms, earthquakes, beasts, poison plants, and yet had not destroyed them. No one knew what humans would do next, and that ignorance was what terrified the galaxy the most. Daniel and Laura returned to their vessel, a sleek craft waiting at the docks. The alien guards at the port stood stiff. As the humans passed, none dared to meet their eyes inside the ship. The crew looked at Daniel, their captain, and Laura. Their voice in the council, they asked without words, "What happens now?" Daniel answered with calm command, "Prepare for departure. We are going home." Laura placed her hand against the cold glass of the viewport, staring at the endless stars. Her voice soft. "They think we are weak." Daniel nodded, but his gaze was sharp. "Let them think that it will make what comes next even stronger." The ship engines roared and the vessel rose into the black sky, leaving the council world behind. As it left the atmosphere, 1,000 eyes watched from satellites and patrol ships. None dared to interfere. The humans had left, but the echo of their presence still hung heavy like a storm about to break on distant worlds. Leaders gathered in secret chambers, some furious, shouting for the destruction of Earth, others whispering carefully that perhaps it was time to rethink the place of humans. In the order of the galaxy, many remembered old wars when weaker races resisted and were crushed in days. But humans were not like the others. No one could forget that Earth itself was a death world, and that those who came from it carried something wild in their blood, something that no empire could fully control on Earth. The news reached long before the ship returned. Every screen broadcasted the words. Every voice carried the message: humans have walked out, and the world held its breath. Some were afraid, some were proud. Some wondered if war was now certain. Daniel and Laura returned to Earth and faced their own people in the Capitol dome. Leaders of Earth Alliance gathered, their faces tense but determined. They asked the question everyone feared. "What have you done?" Laura spoke calm, her voice firm. "We refused." Daniel added nothing, but his silence was enough. The leaders exchanged heavy looks. One of them said, "Then war will come." Daniel looked at them steady. It always does. The galaxy trembled, not because war had started, but because for the first time in generations a race had refused the council openly, and the council had no idea how to answer. In the dark corridors of the council world, whispers grew into arguments. Alien generals spoke of fleets. Alien merchants spoke of lost profits. Alien rulers spoke of pride, but behind all their voices lay the quiet truth. They did not know what humans would do next, and that truth shook them more than any fleet could. The ship that carried Daniel, Laura, and their crew drifted in orbit above Earth, its hull gleaming under the sun. Daniel stood in the command deck, staring down at the blue world below. He thought of the council chamber, of the looks in the alien eyes, of the silence that followed their words. He thought of the fear he saw hiding behind their anger. Laura came beside him, her face pale from the weight of what they had done, but her eyes fierce. "Daniel," she whispered, "they will test us soon." Daniel nodded. "They will, and we will be ready." And so the first stone had been cast, the humans had stormed out, and the galaxy trembled, not yet from war, not yet from fire, but from the unknown. because sometimes silence is the loudest answer, and sometimes walking away is the greatest threat, and across the stars millions of eyes turned toward Earth, waiting, wondering, fearing what humanity would do next. The news of the walkout spread through the stars like fire through dry grass, and every world whispered about the humans who had dared to turn their backs on the council. In the crowded markets of distant colonies, merchants leaned close to each other with hushed voices speaking of the insult of Earth, and in the great halls of alien kings, advisors argued through the night about what humanity's defiance meant. Some said it was madness, some said it was bravery, but all agreed it was dangerous, because no one had ever walked away before the words traveled faster than light, carried by messengers, by traitors, by spies, until even the smallest child on the farthest moon knew the story of the humans who had refused the council on the desert. World of Vectra soldiers drank bitter liquid and muttered about the arrogance of Earth. One of them slammed his cup down his eyes, glowing under the firelight, and said, "They are fools. No one refuses the council and lives." His comrade leaned closer, his voice uneasy perhaps, but they are humans. They come from that cursed world, and that word alone made the soldiers shift in their seats, for every being in the galaxy had heard of Earth, the world where storms could strip mountains, where seas could swallow cities, where beasts with teeth like blades roamed the forests, and yet the humans lived, and not only lived but thrived. No other race had come from such a place and survived to reach the stars. So when the story of defiance spread, it carried with it the shadow of that world. In hidden chambers, the leaders of other species argued. One said, "Strike them now before they gather strength." Another said, "No. Wait and watch. Let them move first," for no one wished to be the first to test the humans, not after what was whispered about their wars in the past on Earth. The people waited with eyes on the skies, some afraid, some proud, some angry. In the streets of the capital, banners flew with the image of a broken chain, and voices shouted, "Words of unity. Humanity will not bow." Daniel watched from the command deck of the orbiting ship. His face calm, his eyes filled with thought. Laura stood near him, reading the endless streams of messages pouring from across the world, some demanding war, some demanding peace, and all of them demanding answers. She turned to Daniel, her voice low. "The galaxy is watching every step we take." Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "Then we must step carefully but firmly." Across the stars, the council tried to control the panic, but cracks began to show. The merchant guilds threatened to withhold trade. The border worlds whispered of rebellion, and the generals spoke of fleets, but none dared to move. First, they remembered the silence in the chamber after the humans left. They remembered the look in Daniel's eyes and the sharp, calm words of Laura, and though they shouted loudly in public behind closed doors, many trembled on a lush world of silver oceans. A group of young students sat in a circle, their teacher telling them of the walkout. One student asked softly, "But why would they do it?" The teacher paused before answering, "Because humans are different. They do not bend. They break, and then they rebuild stronger." Rumors grew wilder with each passing day. Some said the humans had secret fleets hidden beyond the rim. Others said they were building weapons that could burn stars. Others whispered that Earth itself was a weapon waiting to be unleashed in every corner of the galaxy. People argued about what the humans would do next, and in every corner fear grew. The council at last called a private meeting. Only the most powerful rulers and commanders attended, their voices sharp, their faces grim. One said, "We cannot allow this insult." Another said, "If we strike and fail, it will destroy us all." Silence filled the chamber until one old voice spoke, slow, heavy. "You all fear, because you know the truth. The humans are not like us. They come from the world that should have killed them, and yet it did not. If they can survive their own world, what hope have we to break them?" Back on Earth, Daniel walked through the training grounds of the Defense Forces. Soldiers saluted, but he raised his hand for them to continue their drills. He watched as they ran through the mud-climbed steel towers and fired weapons with sharp precision, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what might come. Laura joined him, her eyes scanning the soldiers. "They are ready," she said. "But are we ready?" Daniel did not answer, because he knew that readiness was not just weapons and ships. It was the will to stand when the galaxy demanded that they kneel, and that will was already alive in every human heart. The story of the walkout grew into legend faster than any story before in the cold mines of Zorak. Workers sang of the humans who defied the council in the floating cities of Hara. Children painted banners of Earth's blue sphere, and in the shadow markets of the rim smugglers raised toasts to the race that refused to bow, and every retelling carried more weight than the truth, until the humans were no longer seen as just another young species. They were seen as a storm rising, a storm that no wall could hold. In the council hall's frustration boiled, the presiding chancellor slammed the staff against the ground again and again, shouting for order. But order no longer held the chamber, filled with fear and pride and anger. No one agreed on what to do. But all knew that the galaxy trembled, and the tremor came not from warships or armies, but from silence and from footsteps that had walked away. Daniel looked once more at the stars from the viewport, his thoughts dark but steady. He whispered to himself, "They are afraid not of what we said, but of what we might do," and Laura, standing near, heard him and whispered back, "Let them fear, because we will never bow." And their voices, though quiet, carried the weight of storms, and across the galaxy millions of ears strained to hear what humans would say next, but the silence remained, and the silence was louder than any roar. And in that silence the galaxy trembled. The silence that followed the walkout stretched across the galaxy like a shadow that would not fade. And in that silence the council finally decided to act. Their pride would not allow the insult to stand, so they sent a fleet to the edge of human space, a warning fleet not too large but heavy enough to show their power, to remind humanity of its place. The ships gleamed in the cold of the void, cruisers with weapons that had broken worlds, destroyers that had ended rebellions they came with, banners raised and voices loud, ready to make the humans bend. Daniel stood on the command deck of a human warship, waiting in the asteroid belt where shadows moved like silent giants. The crew around him tense but calm. They all knew this moment was coming. Laura stood at his side, her eyes locked on the stars beyond, her voice low, steady. "They think they can frighten us." Daniel replied, "They have no idea what fear truly is." The council fleet moved closer. Their commander hailed the human ship, his voice sharp, cold. "You will stand down, you will come with us, or you will be destroyed." Daniel did not answer at first. He let the silence stretch the crew, watching the alien faces on the screen, faces filled with pride and arrogance. Then he spoke, "Calm and level, your threats do not move us, we do not kneel." The alien commander laughed, a cruel sound. "Then your death will be a lesson for all who think as you do." His hand moved to give the order to fire, but before he could, the human ship shifted, through the belt, moving like a predator in dark waters, its engines silent. Its movements precise, asteroids spun around it, as if shielding it from the gaze of the enemy. And then with sudden force it struck, not with chaos, but with skill. A single blast cut through the shields of the first cruiser systems, fell dark as if the ship had been swallowed by night. The council fleet fired back, beams of light cut across the belt, striking rock and metal. But the human ship danced between them, weaving through stone and flame, every move calculated, every shot placed with care. Another enemy ship fell, its engines ripped apart by precision fire. Daniel gave no long orders. His words, simple: left flank shield, now target reactor next. Laura relayed commands, sharp and clear, and the crew moved as one. The aliens had numbers, but the humans had something they had never faced before. Unpredictability. The asteroid belt became a weapon. Rocks thrown into the paths of enemy ships. Debris used as cover. Sudden bursts of speed that made the human vessel vanish and reappear like a ghost before the enemy could adjust. 2 more ships were disabled, their crews panicked, their formations broken. The alien commander's laughter was gone, replaced by shouts of anger and disbelief. "How can one ship do this?" he roared. But the answer was simple. Humans had spent their history surviving storms, fighting beasts, battling each other in endless wars. They had learned to adapt, to change, to strike where no one expected. And now those lessons, born from a death world, played out in the stars. The alien fleet retreated, broken, battered, humiliated. Their warning had become a defeat. Their pride had become their shame. Daniel watched them flee, his voice steady. "Let them carry this story home." Laura's eyes shone with fire. "They will not forget this." Daniel shook his head. "No, they will not, but they will try to twist it. They will call it luck or trickery, but inside, they will know the truth. They cannot break us." News of the battle raced across the galaxy faster than any fleet the story told, and retold. A single human ship, standing against many a single crew, turning back the power of the Council. Some stories claimed the humans destroyed dozens of ships. Some said they fought with weapons unseen before. Some whispered that Earth itself guided them. But all stories carried the same weight: the humans had stood, and the Council had fled in the halls of alien kings. The news was received with disbelief and fear. One king threw his crown to the ground, shouting, "Lies, no one can do this." Another sat in silence, staring at the stars, whispering. "Then it begins in the markets," common people whispered with wide eyes. "Did you hear? The humans did not fall. The humans made them run." In the training grounds of soldiers, officers barked louder, drilled harder. But in their eyes, doubt had taken root, for if humans could turn back the Council, what else could they do? On Earth, the news arrived with thunder. People filled the streets, not in fear but in pride. Voices lifted banners, raised songs born in the moment, sang of freedom and fire. Daniel and Laura returned to the capital, their names on every tongue. Yet when they stood before the leaders of Earth, they did not boast. Daniel spoke simple and firm. "This is only the beginning," Laura added. "They will not forgive this victory. They will come harder next time." The leaders nodded, heavy with the weight of truth. They knew war was no longer a question, it was a shadow rising over them all. In the secret chambers of the Council, rage burned hotter than suns. The presiding chancellor slammed fists against the table, demanding answers, demanding blood. One general said, "Strike them now, with everything." One merchant said, "No, if we destroy them, we destroy trade." Another ruler said, "Wait. They are young, they will stumble, we can outlast them." But none truly believed their own words. The image of their fleet retreating haunted them, and whispers of human strength spread, faster than their orders. One elder leaned forward, voice like stone, "You see it, do you not? They did not just win, they showed the galaxy that we can be beaten, and that is a wound deeper than any blade." Silence fell at those words, for they all knew. It was true. The fear that humans had planted was greater than the loss of ships, greater than the insult of refusal. It was the fear of change. Fear that the order of the galaxy was shifting, and that the shift had already begun. Back aboard his ship, Daniel stood at the viewport, the belt now quiet, the stars burning endless, his thoughts heavy. He whispered, "They wanted to frighten us, but now they are the ones who tremble." Laura beside him answered soft and firm, "And this is only the first step." The galaxy did not yet know what humanity would do next, but it knew one thing clearly. The humans had walked away. They had stood their ground, and they had turned back the pride of the Council, and for the first time in living memory, the rulers of 1,000 worlds felt the ground shake beneath them. Not from weapons, not from armies, but from the rising steps of a people who refused to kneel, and in that moment, the galaxy trembled again. The Council chamber stood in silence long after the humans had stormed out, and the air inside the hall felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were trembling with the weight of what had just happened, and leaders of dozens of alien worlds exchanged uneasy glances, while some whispered in hushed voices about what this might mean, and others sat frozen, unable to process the scene they had witnessed. And at the same time, far away on Earth, the human delegation returned to their base with faces set in grim determination, for they knew that the galaxy had underestimated them for too long, and now it was time to show their strength. Inside the base, the leader of the human group, a tall man named Daniel, paced back and forth as his team of diplomats and military officers watched him in silence, and he finally stopped and said that the Council thinks it can bend us with threats and demands, but we will not bow down. And his voice echoed across the room, and his words carried both anger and resolve. And sitting near him was Claire, who had been one of the younger members of the delegation, and she looked shaken but also inspired, and she whispered that the galaxy would never forget what happened today. News spread fast across the stars about how the humans had walked out of the assembly, and soon worlds that had ignored humanity before were now speaking of them with fear and uncertainty. And in places where people gathered in markets or ports or stations, the talk was always the same, about how these Deathworlders had dared to stand against the Council, and what might follow next. And in the heart of the Empire, the ruling elites met in secret chambers, worried that they might have awakened something they could not control. Daniel knew the next steps had to be careful and precise, for one wrong move could plunge everything into war. And yet the humans had no choice but to prepare for that very possibility. And so orders were sent to Earth, and the colonies and fleets began to gather, while soldiers were called to readiness and factories lit up with fire as machines built weapons at a pace not seen before. and in the skies above Earth, massive ships began to rise one by one, as if the planet itself was preparing to. Claire walked outside the base one evening and looked at the horizon where the lights of launch pads glowed against the dark sky, and she thought about what was coming and felt a chill in her heart. But she also felt pride because for the first time in centuries humanity was united not by fear but by defiance, and she knew the galaxy would learn that Earth was not a world to be pushed aside. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of space, alien spies carried back reports of human activity to their leaders, and when the council read those reports they grew restless, and some demanded that humans be crushed quickly before they grew too strong, and others argued that provoking them further would only bring disaster, but no one could deny that. A storm was building, and soon it would break across every star system. On Earth, Daniel held a meeting with his closest advisors in a secure underground chamber, and he told them that the galaxy thinks we are alone, but they forget that we are everywhere, already with colonies hidden and allies silent, waiting for a chance to rise. And he revealed that some alien races had secretly reached out to humans, offering friendship in the shadows, for they too had suffered under the heavy hand of the council, and now they saw in humanity a chance for change. The chamber grew silent as his words sank in, and one of the generals, a stern man named Lucas, finally said that, "Then we are not fighting for survival only, but for something greater." And Daniel nodded and said, "We are fighting for freedom for us and for them." And his voice was steady and filled with fire. And Claire, who sat at the edge of the room, clenched her fists, knowing that the days ahead would test them. All ships continued to rise from Earth, in numbers that shocked even their own people, and in the darkness of space they formed fleets that shimmered like silver oceans, and every pilot, every soldier, every engineer knew that history was turning, and even if fear lurked in their hearts, they stood ready because they were human, and humans did not back down once they had chosen a path. Back in the council chamber, alien leaders argued and shouted, and their voices clashed like thunder as they tried to decide what to do, and some wanted to send fleets at once, and others wanted to send envoys to beg for peace. But in truth, none of them truly understood humanity, for they thought of them as reckless death-worlders. But what they failed to see was that under that recklessness burned a unity forged by struggle and loss, and a will that could shake empires. In the following days, strange reports began to reach the council from border worlds where human ships had appeared without warning, and then vanished before they could be tracked. And on one world, a council outpost was found abandoned, with every system disabled and every file erased, and no trace of the attackers left behind except a single message carved into the wall that read, "We do not kneel." And when this was shown to the council, the chamber fell into silence once again. Daniel stood on the bridge of one of the great ships, watching the stars stretch before him, and he felt the weight of what was coming. But he also felt something else, a strange calm, as if he knew that this was the path they were meant to walk. And beside him, Claire watched with wide eyes, whispering that the galaxy truly would tremble soon. And Daniel only nodded, knowing that the storm was already here, and it was called humanity. The fleets moved in silence across the void, and their engines glowed like suns as they carved paths through the stars. And whispers spread faster than the ships themselves, whispers that the humans were no longer sitting back, that they were on the move, that they carried with them the fury of a world that had been underestimated for too long. And wherever those whispers reached, fear followed close behind. And so the galaxy waited, some with dread and some with hope, as the humans who had stormed out of the council chamber prepared to write a new chapter, not just for themselves but for every being who had ever lived under the shadow of the council. And in the quiet of space, the tremble of what was to come could almost be felt, as if the stars themselves knew that everything was about to change. The human fleets moved deeper into the stars, and every world they passed felt the presence of something unstoppable. For the engines of their ships hummed like distant thunder, and in the heart of each vessel, men and women worked without rest, knowing that history was pressing down on them. And Daniel stood at the front of the flagship with Claire at his side, while reports flowed in from scouts that alien powers were gathering armies to confront them. And still he showed no fear, for he knew that retreat was no longer possible, and every soldier who followed him understood the same truth, that they were walking into fire, but they would not bow. The council finally gave orders for fleets to gather at the edge of human-controlled space, and their ships numbered in the thousands, glowing with the lights of many worlds. But among the alien admirals, There was no unity, for some feared humanity and wished to avoid bloodshed, while others hungered for conquest and believed that crushing Earth would make the galaxy safe again. And as their voices clashed inside their command chambers, time slipped away, and the humans drew ever closer, ready to strike. On the eve of the first great clash, Daniel spoke to his people across every ship, and his voice carried clear through the comm lines when he told them that the Council thought they could break us with fear. But today we show them that we are not afraid. We are the children of Earth, and we have endured storms, fire, and darkness. We will endure this too. And his words echoed in the hearts of all who listened, and even Claire, who had once trembled at the thought of war, now felt her blood burn with pride. The battle began with a silence broken by a single spark as human ships emerged from the void and lit the darkness with their weapons, and the alien fleets answered in kind, and the stars themselves seemed to shudder under the clash, for beams of light and bursts of fire tore through the endless night, and ships exploded like falling suns, while the cries of warriors echoed across the comm lines. Yet through it all, the humans pressed forward, refusing to yield, and every alien commander who watched them realized that this was not a people that could be broken by fear. Claire worked on the bridge, moving from console to console as alarms screamed and sparks rained from shattered panels, and she saw her comrades fall. Yet she never faltered, for she knew that if they survived this night, the galaxy would never forget it. And Daniel gave orders with a steady voice, guiding the fleet like a storm given form. And though their ships were fewer, they struck with such force that whole wings of the enemy fleet broke apart in confusion. When the dust of the battle settled, the Council fleets had been driven back, and the humans stood bloodied but unbroken, and messages began to flow from distant worlds, not of threats, but of hope. For races long silent under the rule of the Council began to send whispers of support and secret offers of alliance, and Daniel read these reports with grim satisfaction, knowing that the tide was turning, and the galaxy that once saw Earth as weak now saw them as the spark of something new. But the war was not over, for the Council still held countless fleets and vast resources, and in their halls leaders screamed in anger and fear that humanity must be destroyed before their defiance spread too far, and they sent spies, assassins, and saboteurs against Earth. Yet each attempt only hardened the resolve of the humans, and every loss only fueled their fire. For they knew they were fighting not just for themselves, but for every being who longed to live free. Months passed, and the war spread like wildfire across the stars, with battles raging on worlds once thought too distant to matter. And everywhere the humans fought, they carried with them the same unyielding spirit. And soon the galaxy spoke of them in a new way, not as reckless deathworlders, but as liberators, who fought without surrender and who stood for more than survival. They stood for freedom, and no story spread faster than the one of how they had stormed out of the Council chamber and shaken the galaxy to its core. Daniel stood once again on the bridge of his flagship as the fleets returned home to Earth, and he looked out at the planet that had birthed them and felt the weight of all they had endured. Yet he also felt pride, for against all odds they had risen, and though many had fallen, their sacrifice had not been in vain. For now the Council trembled, and the galaxy no longer saw humanity as small and fragile, but as a force that could change everything. Beside him, Claire whispered that it was only the beginning, and Daniel nodded, knowing she was right, for the war was not truly over, but the message had been delivered, and it would never be forgotten, that the day the humans stormed out the galaxy trembled, and from that day forward, every star, every world, and every empire would carry the memory of the moment when Earth rose from silence and spoke with fire.